Hope you've been checking out that materials tab. There are 7 materials for today's session, including the slides. Please note we will be recording today our session and posting it in the mnabe.org site under State ABE presentations. Welcome to our COVID-19 and ABE update session for Tuesday, August 4th, 2020. Everyone today can participate. Many of you are already getting well acquainted with the chat function, but also when we get to the Q&A, we'll also have a chance for you to raise your hand to ask questions over the phone or over your headset during those Q&A periods, and we'll unmute you. If you're not able to hear me, or if you're having any technical issues, please chat with Carla Vian, and Carla will be happy to help you out. Today in our webinar, we have staff from the Minnesota Department of Education that will be sharing. That includes Todd Wagner, our State ABE Director, Astrid Leiden, our Professional Development Specialist. This is Brad Haskamp, the Adult Secondary Credential and Education Policy Specialist. We also have Jody Versa, our Education Program Quality Specialist, and Julie Dinkow, our Transition Specialist. We also will have some slides from our distance learning team, Tom Citron-Heisem and Susan Wittkamp-Brandt. And we are always grateful to have Carla Vian from Literacy Action Network as our tech assistance and support and host for today's session. We want to kick off by congratulating Todd. Today is Todd's last day as our Minnesota State ABE Director and Supervisor. This has been part of his kind of ongoing plan or his eventual ease into retirement plan. Lucky for us though, don't worry. This isn't a permanent goodbye. He plans to shift roles and return to the MDE team here again starting in September after Labor Day. Todd, I'd like to have you maybe unmute yourself and share a little bit about your plans or your thoughts going forward or your wishes for the field.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Hey, everybody, this is Todd. After more than 20 years now for me, I think coming up close to 22 years in adult basic ed, and it's been a great run. It's been really the best part, I think, has been all the amazing folks who work in adult basic education. And I was just actually sending an email to a friend saying maybe one of the bonuses, which being the state director is, I sort of often, am associated, kind of get credit for the amazing work that is done by all the folks who work in adult basic ed in Minnesota. So it's been amazing to be part of such a great system. I continue to believe that we really have one of the 2 or 3 best adult ed systems in the country, and that we continue to become a better and better system. Also, just want to also just mention that the response on the part of everybody to dealing with the COVID-19 disruption has really been incredible, and both everybody in the field and also our team at Department of Ed. And I guess the last message I just like to leave everybody with is that we very much have functioned as a leadership team over these last 8 years. I certainly would not have felt capable of being in the state director role if that hadn't been possible, and I hadn't had the opportunity to work with Astrid and Brad and Julie and Jody and Sherry and Alice, and before them Jim Caldwell and Lori Rielt. It's been an amazing team to work with, and because of that, I also know that this will be a really smooth transition for all of them and for all of you, and things will just continue once we get through the COVID-19 disruption. And even during the COVID disruption, that strong culture of constant improvement that runs through the ABE system in Minnesota, and collegiality and collaboration will continue to carry the system forward like it always has. So anyway, thanks very much. Thanks for all the great work. Thanks for letting me be a small part of that. I look forward to having a chance to come back and do some more work with you beginning in September. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Todd. And I couldn't agree with you more that it's been outstanding to see the reaction from the field as you've adapted and innovated quickly through responding to COVID, and honestly, a lot of other disruptions and issues that you faced, either just locally or regionally, or even statewide. So yeah, I couldn't agree more about our outstanding field of adult education. And I would also say I'm really appreciative of our adult education team at the Minnesota Department of Education. Like Todd mentioned, we'll continue to work as a solid leadership team, and we'll continue leading and managing the system as we have been doing in the past, and we'll continue to do in the future. And so people know, as of tomorrow, I will be the new interim supervisor for the adult education team at the Minnesota Department of Education. So we can keep going, and no disruptions, hopefully from our end, and we'll just keep working with you, and we're excited to keep going on this journey together. Todd, we picked this picture for you because it just we know how much you love biking, and this just seemed like something you should be doing. This picture looks like something you should see in the next month.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that, my spouse or or kids are tolerant when I actually buy the bike in that picture as my own retirement present.
Excellent. Okay. Other topics that we have for today include, we have some other announcements and reminders. We also will be talking about professional development, distance learning, high school equivalency, and GED. Then we'll dive into our fall ABE programming. That will be most of the session today, is diving into the fall ABE programming and the new guidance that has come out. And then we'll make sure to have plenty of time for your questions. As always, resources from these webinars and our earlier communications can be found online at mnabe.org under State ABE Presentations. So let's dive into announcements and reminders. I'm going to turn it over to Jody Versaw from our team at this point. Jody.
All right, thank you, Brad. So we wanted to get started this afternoon with a big picture moment to think about where we are and to acknowledge the difficulty of this moment. We feel like this is a moment of transformation. And so this Maya Angelou quote seems appropriate for this moment. And the quote is, "We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty." So we just wanted to kind of start there and acknowledge that there's so much change happening right now. There's so much transformation happening right now. And honestly, I don't know about you all, but I feel like we're kind of in the ugly part, right? Like it feels hard and frustrating and not beautiful yet. But also I think there is opportunity. There is opportunity to come out through this experience in a way that is transformational. And I think that's true maybe for all of us as individuals, but also true for our ABE field. So we just wanted to start there and acknowledge everything, the big picture of what's happening, give you a second to acknowledge, all of the hardness and difficulty of this, and then also a minute to believe and consider that there are transformational possibilities in front of us right now. So thank you for just being in it right now, and working through it together. And we will just continue one step at a time, working through all of this. We're in it for the long haul, and let's hold each other up as we do that. So that's kind of our big picture start, and then we'll kind of get to some more of the logistical things than the steps that happen as we continue walking through all of this. So this is just to let you know that award letters for fiscal year 21 funds are in process and should be distributed out to fiscal agent entities via email soon. As you know, in the month of July, we have a period where ABE folks can report to us if there are any problems with the aid calculation, and we did discover one small problem that was kind of due to a glitch in SID. There were a couple of consortia that had a slight undercount of hours, so we have corrected that, and that resulted in a very, very small 1 cent decline in the state contact hour rate. So it looks like where we're landing is contact hours, the state rate will be $7.74 an hour, and the federal contact hour rate will be 73 cents an hour. So be watching, if you are the fiscal agent contact person, be watching for those award letters to come your way soon. Then another update to give you, I want to let you all know that the contact hour reporting period working group has been meeting, and they have actually met twice so far, and have the final meeting is scheduled for next week on Monday. And just a reminder, if you're not aware of this group, so this is a group of 9 professionals in different roles, in different consortia across the state. And this group has been convened to try to make a recommendation about what to do, what time frame to use for the contact hour report, basically a year from now, that'll be used in calculating the distribution of funding for fiscal year 22. And the idea is to try to figure out and focus on what would have the least negative impact, sort of collectively statewide. So that group has had some really good conversations and is definitely moving towards a recommendation. We do believe that it's likely that the group will decide on a recommendation next week. And then we will plan, our state ABE team will plan to make that recommendation known and explain that to the field at our state ABE update during Summer Institute. So be watching for that. And in the meantime, please know that our message, the message from our leadership team here at MDE to the ABE field remains the same as it has been for a couple of months. Please continue to serve learners as best you can. Use all the methods of communication and instruction you can, even those that can't be counted for contact hours and those that don't count for very many contact hours. That's really your charge. You should be getting your award letter soon for fiscal year 21 funding, which will in most cases be even or even a little more than fiscal year 20. So please use those funds to serve your learners and your community, and try not to be too anxious or too focused on contact hours at this point. So that's kind of our overall message on that. And then I'm going to turn it back to Brad for a few more updates.
Thanks, Jody. So I want to remind folks, this is not new information, but we do have that COVID-19 testing estimate in SID, so that can help you set a instead of a pre-test, if you're not offering in-person programming or testing, you can continue to count hours past 12 hours, even if you're unable to pre-test them by using the COVID ABE EFL estimate or COVID ESL EFL estimate. And then you will also need to determine a provisional level based on whatever informal assessment or a teacher judgment that you use, and enter a score of 1 through 6. So if you use COVID ABE EFL estimate and enter a score of 5, that means their provisional level will be COVID ABE 5, level 5, or I should say ABE level 5. And if you use COVID ESL EFL estimate and put a score of 1, that would put them at ESL level 1. And then that score and level would be replaced by whenever you do an official pretest with that student. If you have questions about this, our SID team has been outstanding at providing some additional clarification and technical assistance. So you can email them at support@mnabe.org. We also want to share some updates about the computer-based test purchase that was made, and we will be distributing tests to many of your programs. We purchased through Southwest ABE, there were more than $62,000 of computer-based tests purchased. That meant more than 25,000 tests split between CASAs and TABE, and those will be distributed to consortia. To be eligible as a consortium, you will need to have some trained staff, staff that are trained on computer-based testing. You'll need to make sure that you set up a CASA's e-testing and or TABE online account, and you need to opt in to participate in a survey that we'll be sending out this fall. A little bit more detail about that. Here's the rough timeline. Starting this month on Tuesday, next week, you'll be able to see an article providing some additional details in the MNABE Connect newsletter. And that will be an article from Marty Olson from our Southwest ABE, our state assessment trainer. And later in the fall, then you'll see an opportunity to sign up for the computer-based testing survey sign up. And this will be going to all consortia managers, and we'd like a response from all consortia, even if you do not want any computer-based testing vouchers for your program. Then later that fall, once that survey closes up, then we're going to start distributing tests to programs. And that'll be round one. The second round of distribution will take place in winter, spring 2001, where we will distribute tests upon request. So a little bit more detail about what that will look like. That survey that we're going to send this fall will collect some of that key information that we need from you. Who is trained on the specific assessments, a little bit more about the account info so we can actually forward directly the test to your program account. And if you want tests, and if so, which test do you want? Do you want all CASAs, all TABEs, or some of each? And that will help us with round one. And for round one, we'll be allocating tests to consortia that opt in via the survey. The number of tests for your consortium will be based using a formula of the consortium's proportion of statewide student testing from March 14th, 2019 to March 13th, 2020, that table A1 period that you used. And so that's how we're going to distribute the first 50% of tests. The final 50% of tests will be distributed starting winter, spring 2021, where we will announce via email when you can actually just request additional tests for your program. And then based on first come, first serve, we'll distribute those tests to your program. More details will be coming, like I said, in the MNABE Connect on Tuesday in Marty's article. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Julie to share some announcements. Julie.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to mention again that the Department of Employment and Economic Development is offering Coursera, which is an online course-taking platform, for free to all Minnesotans. So if you are interested in taking an online course on how to develop online courses for your students, you can take that at no charge through Coursera. There's also just a ton of other courses that people might find interesting to just skill up in your current position, but also to work with learners in the field. There are some certificate courses around technology certificates that you might be able to break down and work with students in attaining those. Next slide. Oh, and I should mention, if you're interested in signing up for those courses, there is in the materials section a document that explains exactly how you can do that. And then also yesterday, an email was sent out and it described 2 grants that AFLA recipients can apply for. And I want to make people aware of that. Some of the programs in Minnesota have applied for these in previous years. The difference is these are now appropriations and they're not dedicated funding. But as I reviewed the application or the RFPs, they very much fall in line with what a lot of the programs in Minnesota offer. And the deadline to submit these are August 31st, 2020. And I believe both of them go for 2 years with the possibility of an extension.
Excellent.
And that's
And
it.
you said there's a resource and there's a letter in the materials section to learn more. Yep. Thanks, Julie.
Yep.
At this point, then, I'm going to turn it over to Astrid to talk about professional development.
Excellent. Thank you, Brad. Good afternoon, everybody. So just a couple of professional development updates and announcements for you all. Our annual ABE Summer Institute is right around the corner, coming up on August 19th and 20th. And as I'm sure you have all heard by now, we are going virtual this year. The registration deadline is coming up August 10th, and a greatly reduced registration fee this year, only $49 for land members. So I know that the Literacy Action Network and the Summer Institute Committee have been really hard at work to make this an excellent experience for you all. So I hope that everyone will be able to attend. They are still looking for poster sessions, which will be virtual and recorded this year. A nice entree into presenting if that's something that's new to you. Those proposals are due August 6th. So the proposal form as well as registration and all of the details are available on the Literacy Action Network website. So hope to see all of you at that virtual event. Go to the next slide. Also wanted to make sure that people had on their radar an opportunity coming up at the end of the month on August 27th to learn more about becoming a Census Ambassador training. This is a webinar that's going to be led by our colleague Cynthia Peters from World Education and the National Coalition for Literacy, sharing information about how to teach students to become census ambassadors. So helping them go into their families and communities and educate people about the importance of the census and encourage them to pledge to participate in the census. So registration is up and available for that now on the Atlas Professional Development calendar. And then finally, just again wanted to make sure that people have their calendars marked for the many different virtual professional development opportunities coming up this fall. As a reminder, we have made the decision in our professional development system to meet only virtually, at least through December. We'll revisit that later this fall. So many of the events that typically happen in the fall in person will be happening online. So we have coming up in September, the Adult Career Pathway Institute and Math Institute. We have re-envisioned our fall regionals since we are not able to meet in person. Instead of holding separate regional events, we'll be holding a statewide teaching and learning at a distance conference. This will be held the afternoon of November 5th and the whole day on November 6th, open to people from all regions. We'll have sessions that focus on relicensure, opportunities to network within regions and across roles, and then lots of opportunities to learn about what's working and best practices around teaching and learning at a distance, since that is what is on many of our minds right now. And then a couple of other events coming up later in the fall, our Support Services Conference, Fall Manager Meeting, and the Volunteer Management Conference. So you can find more information and a complete listing of all of our webinars and events at our PD calendar on the Atlas website, atlasabe.org. Thank you. So let's go on to the next section here, and I'd like to ask Carla to please unmute Todd Citron-Heisem and Susan Wattenkamp-Brandt, our colleagues from the Minnesota Distance Learning Team, to share some updates and information around distance learning resources.
Hi, glad to be here.
Hello, everybody.
So Susan and I are going to kind of divide these up. I'm going to talk about a couple of general things, and she's going to talk about some specific individual platform things. The first thing we'd like to discuss is the number of platform approvals we are receiving, which on the one hand is great because there's a lot of interest. On the other hand, it's completely overwhelming for our DL team to review this many. So we were looking at the website, and there now are over 40 approved platforms, and those provide resources of all sorts for students of all ages. So we'd really like to ask people before they submit new platforms for approval to review all the ones that are already approved to see whether one of the ones that is approved meets your needs. Unlike many states, we have had a fairly open process on platform approval. Many states still only have 1 or 2 platforms for the whole state, and those are the ones that everyone needs to use. So we've taken a really liberal approach, but it's gotten a little bit out of control. Our intent has never been just to have many different platforms approved, but we want to have a good variety that meets most everyone's needs. And at this point, we really feel like we do. So if you would just think carefully, we're not saying we won't review new ones, but please, if you would go through the ones that have already been approved and see whether one of them meets your needs first, we would really approve it. I imagine Jenny at SID would also approve it, since she has to set up a whole new name every time, a whole new mechanism every time a new platform is approved. So it gets to be a pretty complicated situation. If you go on to the next, I'm going to turn the next couple of slides over to Susan.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, so along with approving lots of other platforms, we're also, of course, implementing our 2 new statewide available platforms, one of which is MobiMax. And we have sent all of the account requests to our account rep, and those have all been added to the system. So everyone who has requested an account on our statewide school should have that account by now. If you didn't receive the automated message from the system, make sure to check your junk mail or your spam folder, because a lot of times those get directed into a junk or spam mail folder. You can log in with your email address, and Jasmine was not able in all cases to use everybody's preferred custom passwords. So if you try your custom password and it doesn't work, use the generic password 123456 instead. And that should get you in. We have a training with Jasmine on Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock, and I've sent that information out to everybody by email. But again, if you didn't get that message or you need a reminder of the link, it is here on the slide. And that's a GoToMeeting link. So you don't need to register for that. You can just click the link at the time and join the meeting. And then also don't forget that we have had a couple of previous webinars this past year on MobiMax, and both of those were recorded and posted on the Professional Development YouTube channel. You can find those in the distance learning playlist. So if you're not able to join us on Thursday, you can go ahead and review those. And go ahead to the next slide. And then our other state-supported platform that we're adding this year is EdReady, and we are hard at work getting that ready for everybody to use. We have built the custom URL for Minnesota Adult Education to use EdReady, and you can see the link there. Jason and I are working on customizing the site and getting it ready to use. There is actually a lot of setup that needs to be done when you add EdReady. There are a lot of choices to make about which courses to add and how to set up teacher accounts and permissions and things like that. So there's a lot of work for us to do to kind of get it ready for everybody to join us. But we will be sending out a teacher account request form sometime this month. And then in the fall, we will be providing training. Right now, Jason and I are focused on teaching ourselves how to use it so that we can teach you. But stay tuned for more information soon.
Hey, Susan, there's a question in the chat from Kathleen about the number of MobiMax seats that are available and whether there will be a state limit in terms of the number assigned to each consortium or how those will be distributed.
Good question. So we are not limited in how many teacher accounts we can have. So every teacher can have an account if they'd like, but we are limited in how many students accounts we can have on the active roster at a time. And for statewide use, we've purchased 4,200 active licenses for students, and that is based on data from how our Edmentum site has been used and how MobiMax had been used in the past. Based on SID data, we think it should be sufficient as long as everyone practices good rostering practices, regularly removing inactive students and only enrolling students who are going to be a good fit for the product. We can add additional licenses later throughout the year if we need to, if we have funding. I don't think we have additional funding to purchase more at this time, but it's it's something we could investigate if demand overreaches what we are available to provide right now. But I think what we have should be sufficient. So we're not telling consortia how many specifically they can use. We are hoping that everyone will practice good rostering practices and kind of just be judicious in enrolling students, and we think we should have enough to meet demand.
So we want everyone to practice good roster hygiene, is another way of putting it.
Yes. Yes. So unenroll people who aren't actively using it, and only enroll students who have a device, can commit to using it. Don't just throw everybody in your program on it, whether or not you think they're actually going to use it.
Go on to the next slide. Just a couple of quick things on the website. We have now added filters to all of the platforms, both state supported and other. And those are to help people find platforms that may respond to specific needs, levels of instruction, and types of learners. If you have, if you identify other items that you'd like us to add or consider adding to the filters, please just let us know. We can do that relatively easily. We also have gotten all the platforms on the correct pages, the state-supported ones versus the other ones. And we're just beginning to discuss a project that we'll be talking more about later this year, where we will be redesigning the DL website. We realize it's kind of grown by Topsy over the last number of years, and we want to slim it down a little bit and make sure that we just put the most important and meaningful information on the website. So we'll be talking more about that as time goes on. Go on to the next slide.
Actually, Tom, that's your last slide for DL.
Thank you. Okay.
And we did just have a couple questions that I want to make sure we get to during this DL section. There's some questions about the EdReady URL. One person asked if that EdReady URL is set in stone. They were saying that for their students, this might be a really long URL for the students to type.
Yes, it is what it is. I can't change it at this point.
Okay, excellent. And then a question about transitioning students if they were already using MobiMax. So one person is saying that they have students using it past and present.
Right. So if when you requested a teacher account on our new statewide license, you requested to transfer that account, our account rep Jasmine did also transfer the student rosters along with that. So your student accounts should have come with you. If you did not request a transfer, if it was a new account under a new email address, then obviously those student accounts didn't get transferred.
Okay.
So if that didn't happen for you, you can contact us at the support desk email, and I'll make sure to get you in touch with Jasmine, and she can help you out with that.
Excellent. And there was a question about EdReady. Is that just for college readiness?
It's also for TABE prep. So the two primary content areas on EdReady are English language arts and mathematics. The English language arts is primarily at the high school and college readiness level, but the mathematics content goes down into the elementary school level of content. So if you're looking for TABE mathematics preparation, this would be a really good product.
Excellent. Okay. I think that was all the big questions. I think there might be a couple others in there that are just more specific or unique to individuals. So thank you both very much.
And always please remember, if you have questions that haven't been answered or come up, just submit those to Zendesk, and we will get back to you right away with answers.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Susan. Okay, next topic, we're going to share a couple updates about high school equivalency. First, just wanting to let folks know that GED numbers are going up, but they're not quite at our pre-March levels or even at our March levels. In a typical month, we have roughly between 1,000 and 2,000 tests offered in Minnesota or taken in Minnesota. And at this point in July, we only had about 653. So we're about half of where we were before COVID-19 related closures. Also, just so you know, of the 1,134 people that have tested from March through July, 72 have actually used testing via OP, and I'll talk through that a little bit more later. And we've had 428 graduates during that time, which is less than what we would usually have in a 5-month period, much less. Regarding OP, OP is that on-view proctored testing where a person can take a GED test not from the test center, but actually at home or potentially even in an adult basic education program if a GED test center is not open. And that session is proctored by someone live through OnView that's hired by OnView. Any GED tester that is age 18 plus is eligible for OP testing if they have a GED Ready green score, or what is also known as likely to pass score, within the last 60 days. And if that tester does have a GED Ready green score that is within the last 60 days, they will see a banner that you see at the bottom of the screen here, online testing now available, and they can schedule or learn more there. So that is yet one more testing option for some students. Remember though the OP technical details here, that we would strongly recommend that a tester conduct a systems check when they schedule testing. That makes sure that their computer hardware and software and their internet is actually of high enough quality to actually take the GED test from that location. And testers, when doing OP testing, they can check in as much as 30 minutes before or as late as 15 minutes after their scheduled test start time. And they can also cancel the testing up to 30 minutes before scheduled testing time. The testers now have what is called a whiteboard, and if you download these slides and click on the link to the whiteboard, it'll give you a little bit more information from GED.com what that whiteboard looks like online. And remember, testers must be at least 18 plus. That's because of data privacy laws. 18 plus in order to do OP testing. The cost is the same as on-site GED testing, and currently the OP test is only available in English, unlike the in-person GED testing. But GED testing service is working on the Spanish version as well. We also want to let people know that the GED subsidy code, MNGED30, has been extended to September 30th at this point. We're working with administration, who only approved the extension to September 30th, even though we had asked for it to be extended to December 30th or December 31st. So they are working on an extension at this time, or they will start working on an extension sometime later this month. And surprise, surprise, I hope I have good news for you, or interesting news. The HISEAs competition is in process for being posted. It should be posted as early as next week. And again, our HISEAs competition, that's to determine which Minnesota high school equivalency assessments we will approve here in Minnesota. We might approve one, we might approve multiple tests. We have a great team of reviewers from Minnesota Department of Education, from the Department of Corrections, and from our ABE programs across the state, including some programs working with tribal nations. We anticipate the results will be announced in October or November. So stay tuned for more information there. That's all of our updates. Now we can actually get to the big discussion of the day, and that's an update on fall ABE programming guidance. Before we dive into each of the key pieces of guidance, we wanted to share with you that there's no one-size-fits-all for ABE programming decisions or guidance across the state. What works for a student maybe, or for a program in Blue Earth, might not be the best option for Minneapolis or for Moorhead or Duluth for that matter. So we want to make sure that you understand and that we understand that there is a no one-size-fits-all here. And because we do have fewer directives to share that apply uniformly statewide, local programs and districts will be determining which models to offer throughout the year based on community cases, local capacity, resources, and your local plans. So we encourage you to work with your organization's leadership to determine the best plan for ABE programming at your site. So let's talk about the 4 pieces of guidance that you will see in the materials tab that we'll walk through today. First, there is the Executive Order 20-82, and that kickstarted a lot of this other guidance and was the basis. Next is the Safe Learning Plan for 2020-2021. This is a new document that was released on July 30th. Then there is the updated school year planning guide or school year planning document from MDE. And there's the 2020-2021 planning guide for schools, health considerations for navigating COVID-19. This is a document, an updated document, and it was updated on July 30th. And that's from that again is from the Minnesota Department of Health. All of these can be found online at the MDE COVID-19 updates website, which you can see the link on the bottom right-hand side or bottom left-hand side of the screen. So now let's actually dive into the specific documents themselves and provide some key updates. I'm going to turn it over to Jody Versat at this point. Jody.
Thanks, Brad. So we're starting with the sort of biggest, broadest piece of guidance here, and we won't spend a lot of time with this one, but as I'm sure you are all aware, on July 30th, so last week, the governor released Executive Order 2082, and so just a few sort of key things to point out about this executive order. One interesting thing that it does is it uses this language of dial back and dial forward, which we think is just a sort of a good framework for the rest of this discussion. As I know you are all already thinking about, when we consider educational programming for the upcoming school year, we're no longer thinking about sort of a switch of like on or off, in or out. We are thinking of a dial. So districts and schools will have to decide where are they going to start for the fall, but then there will be opportunities and expectations of potentially dialing back, which means having programming that is more restrictive, more distance focused, and less in person. Or it's possible, based on public health factors, that the dial could be dialed forward, which means that it would then be allowable to have more in-person programming and less distance education. So we just thought those are important sort of terms that help us think about how to think about our programming for the upcoming year. And those terms first appear here in this executive order. A couple other sort of big picture things that this executive order requires. It requires that districts have a plan in place 2 weeks before school starts to know what educational model they will be starting with. So as we all know, the 3 options are in-person, hybrid, or distance. So just for you to have that time frame in mind of when your local school district is beginning their school year, and just knowing that 2 weeks before that, there's got to be a plan in place, at least for the starting point. Then another relevant requirement is that this executive order does lay out that districts and schools are required to allow at-risk staff to work from home to the extent possible. So we recognize there's definitely some gray area there, and we will, we'll touch on that again in this conversation today, because we know that's something that many of you are trying to figure out. But just want to point out that that language is right there in this executive order document. So that's some of the highlights of that document. Then next, we want to talk about the Safe Learning Plan, which is the next, sort of the next level down document. This document was also released along with that executive order last week when the governor had, his highly anticipated press conference on Thursday. This document is authored by the Minnesota Department of Education. However, it does not specifically reference ABE, so just, something for you to know. It doesn't mean it's not relevant, but just pointing out that it doesn't call out anything specific to ABE. And this document is 21 pages long. We're giving you page numbers because it's easy to kind of get lost in which document am I looking at. So this is actually one of the shorter ones. This one is about 20 pages. So to break down kind of the most important information in this plan, now, first of all, remember this plan is written for quote unquote districts and schools, okay? So that's the audience. And what the plan directs districts and schools to do is to consider what are called learning model parameters. And that's really talking about the positive COVID-19 cases within a county, and to use that as a starting point. And then so that's in the green circle on the left, but that's only a starting point. The Safe Learning Plan then says in the blue circle in the middle that also, in addition to that case count by county, it's important to consider the district and the school's capacity to meet all of the required public health guidelines. And those would be based on local factors like, are there enough buses, and what size are the classrooms, and is there enough staff available? So that's sort of the second part of the equation. And then those factors together can result in a decision for what learning model will be implemented, at least at the beginning of this upcoming school year. So that's kind of the big picture model of what the Safe Learning Plan lays out. And then a little more about the details. Again, I imagine you are familiar with this, but this is sort of the core important new information that we learned Thursday last week. These learning model parameters are the definitions, or sort of the numerical guidance for the number of COVID-19 cases per 10,000 people in a county, and then what that correlates to in terms of allowable learning models, at least as a starting point. And so just a note, we recognize that this document talks about elementary students and secondary students, and our ABE students are neither of those things. However, just from a common sense perspective, we think it makes sense that you would consider your ABE learners age-wise are more similar to secondary learners than younger learners. So you maybe want to be paying particular attention to what's happening in the high school buildings as your district is making decisions. So just a comment about that. So those are the learning model parameters that are laid out in the Safe Learning Plan. That's the starting point. And then districts and schools need to take that information from the learning model parameters and then decide and make sure that they are able to meet all of the requirements if they are, allowed to and planning to do either hybrid learning or in person. learning. So there has to be capacity to do all of these things that are required by public health in order to sort of get the green light to go ahead and proceed with that learning model. All right. So kind of in summary of this document, a few sort of key points of what's in the plan. As I just mentioned, it sets out those metrics for those allowable learning models, and that's just based on numbers of COVID-19 cases. And then defines that the decision of what learning model to use has to also take into account the capacity to implement all those MDH requirements. This plan also defines that districts have to work with a regional support team. So the regional support team is folks from MDE, MDH, and as well as those local districts and local public health. So there'll really be teams of people that will be working together to make these decisions. So that's something defined in this plan. And then the last thing we just want to kind of highlight from this plan is that this plan requires face coverings. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that in a little bit, because we know that's the logistical question that all of you are facing if you're considering in-person learning, right? So the plan says that face coverings are required and that there will be a statewide distribution of face masks and face shields to districts and schools. We have put out a question to leadership above us at the Minnesota Department of Education about whether ABE staff and students are included in that count and whether they will be included in the distribution, and we don't have an answer to that. I think common sense says that probably nobody other than those of us listening right now thought to ask that question. So we'll talk again a little more about this coming up, but basically we encourage you to be advocating for your program and for your students and staff to be counted in those counts, but we can't necessarily guarantee that will always be the case. So, but we'll keep thinking and talking about that. So I'm going to pause for a second, and I don't know if there are questions in the chat that we need to address. Otherwise, I will hand it back to you, Brad.
Jody, there's some great discussion regarding planning over large geographic areas that I think we can come back to a little bit later in the webinar. Also a question about CBOs, and we will be touching on that again a little bit later in the webinar.
Great.
Thanks, Jody. Thanks, Astrid. So I'm going to walk through the third planning document, and then we will be able to dive into questions after we go through the four main documents and a couple additional summary points. So first off, this document, which is the 2020-2021 Planning Guidance for Minnesota Public Schools, is a revised version of a document we shared in June. This updated document was released on July 30th, and the original was dated June 18th. There is a section that refers to ABE programming here, but it has no changes from the June version. This document is 111 pages total, so it is the big document out of the four pieces of guidance. And this one was authored by the Minnesota Department of Education. Again, this document is very K-12 focused, but you can see the difference between the original documents and the new document in case you're wondering what to compare it to. If you don't want to read this cover to cover, all 111 pages, one way that you can tell how the new document has been updated from the original document on June 18th, you will see every places where there are updates, you'll see that highlighted in gray and with a note saying added or updated 7/30/20. So that will help you kind of make some considerations or see what is actually new in this document from the original. Specifically, that ABE section is not changed from the June version. So you can see the direct quote here, just saying that ABE should plan, providers should plan for all three scenarios and adhere to the Minnesota Department of Health guidance, and that we want to make sure that we understand that the primary goal of programming is to help, especially the in-person programming, is to help ABE programs deliver ABE services in an equitable way to all ABE students in the communities they serve while still following public health guidelines. Also, there's a specific part in here in that same ABE section. There are a couple sentences or paragraphs about testing. Just reiterating that we have our modified testing expectations with that COVID-19, with that EFL estimate that we talked about before. Also noting that computer-based remote testing options have been approved, and that for in-person programming, whether that's all in-person or hybrid, programs should prioritize collecting information for instructional and placement purposes rather than testing solely for accountability purposes, such as for MSGs, measurable skill gains, or testing rates. The goal of the in-person programming, especially in a hybrid situation, is to allow for more equitable delivery of ABE programming. So we wanted to reiterate that guidance from that document. And that is pretty much all of the guidance that we have about that 111-page document at this time. There are a couple other sections that have been updated, but for the most part, that is the primary chunk that affects ABE programming. Next is the Minnesota Department of Health document. And this is, again, is an updated document that was released on July 30th. The original was again on June 18th. This document is 18 pages. Some key updates really revolve around the area of face coverings. With the Governor's Executive Order 20-81, the guidance has been updated to say that all students, staff, and other people present in school buildings and district offices are required to wear a face covering. So when you're in an ABE classroom, the expectation is that people will be wearing a face covering. This document also provides some guidance on what a face covering is. There are different types of allowable face coverings, including the well-known paper disposable mask and cloth masks. It also says that scarves, bandanas, and religious face coverings are allowable. And then it sets some parameters about what the face coverings should do. They should cover the nose and mouth completely, should not be overly tight or restrictive, and should feel comfortable to wear. And noting that the face covering is not meant to replace or be a substitute for social distancing. It also describes, the section talks about face shields and saying that a face shield is allowable by teachers when if wearing a face covering like a cloth mask would impede the educational process. It's also allowable for staff, students, or visitors who cannot tolerate a face covering due to a developmental, medical, or behavioral health condition. And also, it's allowable for staff providing direct student support services when a face covering would impede the services being provided. And this updated section also notes that you are to post your policy and clearly communicate your policy on face coverings to students, staff, families, and potential visitors. And also to teach and reinforce use of face coverings and or shields for students and staff throughout the day. And in this MDH guidance, there are other key sections, and we walked through those guidance. We walked through that guidance before about protecting vulnerable populations, cleaning and materials handling, monitoring and excluding for illness, which includes screening everyone entering the building, and support mental health and wellness. So we encourage you to read those sections of the documentation as well. they are very similar, if not identical to before from our initial read. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Jody to share a little bit more about some key summary items as well as some other considerations.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So I know this question has already come up, but we do want to acknowledge that while many of you are working in programs that are directly associated with K-12 school districts, many of you are not. We know we have corrections programs, we know we have CBOs, and then we have programs that may be associated with a district, but you actually operate in a building that's owned by somebody else. We know some of you are on college campuses, some of you are in career force centers and libraries and other places. So we want to acknowledge that the guidance that has come out at the state level does not specifically address your situation if you are not working directly for a district in a district building. So that's sort of in some ways maybe an advantage, in some ways maybe a disadvantage, right? So we can just acknowledge that there isn't any specific guidance for those scenarios, but also that just in a general sense, you consider yourself part of the larger education landscape. And you obviously are aware you will need to work with your organization leadership to make these determinations. So that could be the Department of Corrections. If you're working in a county correctional facility, that could be county leadership. CBOs have their own internal leadership. It might be the college staff, the career force centers. So we just want to acknowledge that you will have to coordinate with those folks as well as you are making determinations about what model to use for your ABE programming. We do want to encourage you, even if you are not employed by a district or you are not directly, have a direct relationship with district leadership, please continue to be aware of what your local school district is doing. Because the number of cases in the county where you are located should still be a very important metric for you to use in making your decisions, even if you're not really at the table for those district discussions. So, yep, we just want to acknowledge that at this point, and kind of acknowledge the complexity of it, and encourage you to, sort of stay up to date with your district as much as you can, but work with, the appropriate leadership and the appropriate authority to make these decisions. And then in addition to that, another kind of big picture consideration and factor, we have said this before, but we want to say again that we encourage everyone across our field, across the state, to be using an equity lens when you are making decisions about programming for the fall and for the entire upcoming school year, particularly when you're considering whether or not you are able to shift from distance to hybrid or to in-person. And so we've listed here some of the questions that we know you are asking yourselves already, but we just want to kind of reiterate them and encourage you to keep walking through these messy questions. The questions about access to devices, access to the internet, the necessary digital literacy skills, questions about folks who have very low levels of literacy in any language and or very low levels of English proficiency, as well as your students who are vulnerable folks who would be at higher risk of illness, and to just continue, asking the questions about how do we do the right things for those individuals in our communities. And also just thinking about who is continuing to show up, who is continuing to receive services during this time, and who isn't, and what are the implications of that. Obviously none of us have the answers or, easy solutions for any of these considerations, but we want to acknowledge that these are important questions to be thinking, and we know you are doing that. So we thank you for that. And then before we kind of open things up for question and further discussion, we kind of wanted to summarize a few of what we see on our team from our statewide perspective. Here are some of the key things we think that you should be thinking about and doing in this moment with respect to this, statewide guidance for the whole educational system. So first of all, we just really encourage you to be familiar with these guidance documents. We know it's a lot, but there really is important, useful things in there. So we encourage you to spend some time with the guidance. We encourage you to work with leadership. For many of you, that would be district leadership. For some of you, that's some other organization leadership. As you figure out your plan for ABE programming, this is not a moment to be a rugged individualist. This is not a moment to go rogue. This is really a moment to lean into the community and work together with other folks in the community to figure out what the best approaches are. In addition, we encourage you to be a voice for your program, for your staff, for your students within the larger organization, within your district or your organization, and at the table where other folks may not have ABE really in mind or in the forefront of their consideration. We encourage you to advocate for access to those masks and face shields and COVID testing that are being distributed statewide. However, we acknowledge that we're not, I think that's a question that remains to be seen over the next few weeks and months of how that's really going to shake out for us in ABE and how much access will be given to ABE programs and ABE students for those things. So we also want to acknowledge it is allowable for you to use your state or your federal ABE funds to purchase masks, cleaning supplies, or anything else that's necessary to comply with the public health guidance. So just keep that in mind. Another important factor that we know many of you are already thinking about is your staff that identify as high risk and how to address those needs and their requests for work from home assignments. Again, we don't have silver bullets or perfect answers for that, but we encourage you to be working through that and considering all the nuances of that. Also, we want to sort of make sure that you're thinking about when you are choosing which learning model to use for ABE and when you're thinking about the dial and turning it back or turning it forward. In general, I think we can say that you as a leader in an ABE program are free to choose a more restrictive model than your district. So you may choose to do distance only, even if the district can do hybrid or is going to do hybrid at the K-12 level. However, if you're interested in doing a less restrictive model, so if your K-12 district is going to do distance only and you're thinking about hybrid, we just encourage you to be a little cautious about that and make sure that you have support from leadership above you and have a clear justification and plan in terms of meeting all of the MDH requirements in place as you move forward to try to do that. And then lastly, we encourage you to be working on and developing hybrid and distance learning models, even if you're going to offer in-person instruction this fall. There's a couple reasons for that. The first and most important reason is because all districts and schools are required to offer distance learning to students who request it. So you need to be prepared to offer distance learning to your students if that's what they want and need and prefer. In addition, remember these are dials. And if you are opening for in-person instruction this fall, you should be approaching that with the understanding that the dial may be turned back. And there may be a point if there is a surge of cases in your community where you will need to move to hybrid. or there could be a point where you would move from hybrid to distance only. So we really encourage you to be thinking about all three models. We know you have them. And to really be building models that are going to serve students now as much as possible, but on into the future, right? Remember our butterfly, like we are becoming something new and different. And we encourage you to really kind of embrace that and move through that and work towards stronger hybrid and distance learning options because it looks like that's where we're headed long term in the future. So yeah, I think that is the kind of the summary of what we were hoping to share with you today. And I think we can open it up at this point for questions. I think we've got some things in the chat. So I don't know if Astrid, if you can help us work through what's there.
We do have some questions in the queue that we can start with here. One question, if we go back a bit, was about where to find the updated cases by county, and Amber Delegar did post that link in the chat to where you can find that. Thank you, Amber, and we can repost that if that would be helpful to folks. Thanks so much, Amber, for reposting that. And then we had another question regarding face masks versus face shields and whether those are interchangeable, and if the face shield can replace the use of a mask.
So I would encourage you to read that section carefully in the MDH guidance. Brad, will you just confirm that that's the correct document, that that's where the breakdown of that is in the MDH planning guidance?
Yes, that is where they talk about face coverings and face shields.
Great. So please do read that. However, our understanding at this point is that face coverings are required, and face coverings include, there was a list on a slide that Brad talked through of a mask or a bandana, a religious covering. So all of those things are considered face coverings. And then the section about face shields is really talking about when a face shield can be used as an alternative to a face covering. And it really seems to focus on if wearing a mask kind of gets in the way of education somehow, then a face shield is appropriate. So that is my understanding, is that yes, in these cases listed here, a face shield can replace a mask or another kind of face covering.
Great, thank you, Jody. I think that addresses the specific questions that have come up so far regarding the guidance itself. We do have some really good questions just looking for feedback from others in the field about decision points. So a question from Amy regarding how to make a decision if you are working in a consortia that covers a very large geographic area that might encompass a number of different districts and areas. And perhaps we can have people raise their hands and unmute if you've got thoughts about how you're planning to do that. Laura, looking for examples of updated surveys that others have used in contacting your students now as we're getting close to the start of the fall year. So if people have already started chiming in with their approaches, a lot of programs just contacting students directly via calls and texts. Also looking for guidelines about onboarding new volunteers. So if people have ideas to share, that would be really great. You can either write in the chat or raise your hand. Another question here, if you have a plexiglass barrier on a table that separates individuals, especially in very small classrooms, do masks and shields still need to be used?
So Kirsten, my understanding is yes. I think currently the requirement is that everyone across the state of Minnesota wears a mask in any indoor public space. So that would include any space where ABE programming is happening. So yep, general rule, no matter what other safety precautions are in place, masks or some kind of face covering are required.
Jody, can I chime in?
Absolutely.
I would also, Kirsten, I would encourage you to read that MDH guidance, because there is a whole section there about when you can remove the face covering, according to the Minnesota Department of Health guidance. So in that MDH guidance, there is a whole section about when that face covering can be removed. So I'd encourage you to look through that for additional answers.
Yeah, true.
We have a couple of questions regarding COVID testing. So one question about whether we can spend ABE funding on COVID tests. I'm assuming for staff, if we don't get that covered by our district. So that's the first question.
Sorry. Yeah, I think technically probably yes. But I do think, yeah, I see there's another question here about the free. So K-12 districts have been told that they will get one free saliva test for all Minnesota teachers. We have asked leadership above us to reply to us about whether that includes ABE teachers. So we haven't gotten an answer on that yet. I guess as a program manager, I would be a little cautious about whether I would decide to spend funds on that for teachers. But I guess I'm opening this up to the other MDE staff. I would say it is allowable to do so. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Jody, this is Todd. I guess I agree with you, and my thought is that if it's necessary to being able to provide instruction, and I think also if one has exhausted other possible avenues of having access to the testing, i.e. through district GEARS funding, for example.
Yep, that makes sense. So I guess maybe our thought on that, Teresa, is technically allowable, but I wouldn't consider it as your sort of first approach to how to make sure your staff can get tested if they need to.
Jody, can I just add one other thing? I believe that I can't remember where I read it now, but something about even the intent with K-12 teachers, I think, is related to filling in where other health avenues aren't available, like they're not able to go to a local clinic or testing site to be tested.
Right, that is my understanding as well, Todd. So yeah, and as Kathy is pointing out, personal health insurance may cover that for many folks. So I think, ongoing issue that we will definitely continue to talk more about this fall, for sure. Do we have other questions coming up in the chat, or we could go on? We have a few more questions on the next slide if we want to move to those.
Let's move on. I'm not seeing any other new questions coming in, Jody.
So these are some questions that we imagine many of you are already thinking about. So if any of you have any answers for any of these questions that you want to put in the chat, you could do that. We're also wondering at this point, as we have a few more minutes today, we can talk some more about some of these things if we need to. But we wanted to inquire at this point, I guess, if you all are interested in convening again next week. Our thought is we could do a similar webinar like we did one in July, where it was less of us as MDE staff presenting and more, discussion and exchange between, folks out there in the field, explaining what they're doing and inquiring what other people are doing. So we are curious whether that would feel useful to you or not. We definitely do not want to do that if it's not useful to folks. So we are open to the possibility, but really want to kind of take a lead from you all. Do you think you would benefit from the opportunity to convene again next week with other ABE folks to talk some more about what you're doing for fall programming, or do you think your local discussions and planning are going to be sort of your focus for now? So seeing some yeses. Great. And it's also great, if you have specific questions or things that you think would be good to address when we convene again next week, or things you'd like to know from other folks, go ahead and put those in the chat. We'll be sure to look back at the chat log to capture all of those things. So thank you to everybody who's responding in the chat. That's really helpful. So it looks like there's some interest in that. I think we'll probably move forward with then planning for another webinar for next week. Yes, who knows what next week might throw our way. So maybe at this point, I'm going to hand it back to you, Brad. I don't know if we had any other.
Thanks, Jody. Yeah, it seems like strong support for another discussion-based webinar. Again, maybe something that would be a little bit more discussion, a little bit more of ABE programs sharing with one another, like you said. Excellent. Amy Fish is asking about, or kind of bringing up some points about COVID testing, with the test results in 3 to 5 days for surgical screening and 3 to 7 days for general testing in their area right now. And samples are being sent to Mayo. My understanding is the saliva test is faster for making safe decisions. That is interesting to know. That's information I did not have. Okay. Well, what other questions do you have here? We can continue to monitor the chat. Any other questions that you have about the COVID-related fall ABE fall ABE programming, or any of the MDE and MDH guidance, or questions about the governor's executive orders? We can also answer any other questions about other things too. Not everything is related to fall ABE guidance. As you're thinking about your questions, I just wanted to remind you that thank you first for your time and all of your great thoughts and questions. Remember that our presentation materials will be posted at mnabe.org/state-abe-presentations. And we can continue to, and then we will see many of you then on August 12th from 1:30 to 3 for the next session. Let's answer any additional questions you might have. Oh, and also, Carla, I think at this point we can end the recording.